Okay, the Hangout is live. Hello, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I am Mike Mateen.
Tonight we are talking about the penultimate episode of Survivor, David versus Goliath. Next week is the finale, but there's more game to be had before we get there, so we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Nice anticlimactic trail off there. So this was a crazy episode, and those who have been listening for a while know that Mike and I were both fans of Christian, and so I don't want to speak for you, but I'm certainly myself sorry to see him go, and yet we knew he was in trouble.
Yeah, I think when it was really hard to see a way out of this one for him outside of winning immunity.
Yeah.
And this is another one like last week where it's like, I wish we had seen more of how they got to where they were, because it seemed like they all, like, it looked erratic when you saw the votes. Like, people were just kind of choosing who they wanted to vote for.
Well, I mean, to some extent, it may have been erratic. I mean, this may be an example of an episode where the editing of feeling erratic is kind of holds out, because essentially what you had is multiple, groupings that didn't even within their own grouping agree on what they were planning to do. And it kind of was chaotic. It really seemed like. Now, I suppose the flip side of that is so if we want to say there was some vote flipping going on, or vote splitting is what I meant to say, which is if we had a coalition, let's say, that was trying to get out Christian with Allison as a backup, and splitting in that regard in case of an idol, that would have been that doesn't work because Christian voted for Allison. So the only way a split could have made any sense would have been if it was Christian and Davey. And who's the group that would be agreeing on that? So I think it really was just all these different factions, each trying to do their own thing and not having a good understanding of what everybody else is doing, and not even having their own mind made up. And it just resulted in, I think, 3 different groups voting for 3 different people.
Well, here's what the one that kind of threw me off, though, is that Nick kind of was leading that charge for Davey, but wasn't one of the ones who ended up voting for him.
Right.
So now that I look at it, it either was like a bunch of different groups of people choosing who they wanted to vote for and not really knowing who all was with them, which is why Nick, ended up having to play 2 quote unquote idols, for no votes. But that being said, the way the votes came out with only Christian and Davey voting for Allison, you could
Well, you're right. Christian and Davey voted for Allison.
Christian and Davey are the only ones who voted for Allison, so you could be right in that a vote split was 3-2. Christian with Davey as the 2, and then wherever Davey plays his idol, the other one either goes home or Davey and Allison tie, and then they figure out what to do.
That might have been it. It would have been obviously the group of Allison, Angelina, Kara, Mike, and Nick.
Right, who all either voted for Christian or Davey.
Yeah. So I could see that maybe being ultimately what happened, but it played very chaotic in the episode. Like, certainly that might be the editing, but that would be one explanation that would make sense. But I think what also potentially makes sense is it really did break down, and there wasn't actually an overall strategy. It was everyone trying to figure out what was going to happen, and they weren't sure.
Right. And I think then some of the confusion was, so Nick and Davey both play idols, but neither of them was really in danger, except that Davy would have been in danger had he played it for Christian. So I think, like we said, we would have been nice to see it because either explanation makes sense. But regardless, there are some things that happened at the beginning that led to some of the chaos at the end.
Yeah.
Particularly what Nick did. So we could.
Yeah. Well, and
that affected more than just Nick. That affected me too.
Oh, absolutely. So, we started the episode with Christian kind of doing the math and realizing that Nick must have turned on him. Saying the number of votes he received means that Nick must have been one of them.
Right.
And so he is, I like, this is a dynamic they actually comment on at the tribal council, but I like this idea of none of the people left really dislike each other. I mean, we've talked about how we didn't really think there was anyone unlikable left, but that applies to them too. They don't even dislike each other. There's not even any animosity. They're all being really good sports about what's going on, which is cool.
Yep.
And so having Christian not take it personally, and everyone's kind of being really cool about how it all turned out and just like, hey, that's the game. But it really was pretty clever of Nick to say, okay, not only do I know there might be a new idol, but everybody knows there might be a new idol. So what if I just find it? And, he's made this fake, very proactively. He said he'd been saving stuff for weeks, which was cool. So he had made this fake, but the use of it, of finding the fake one, especially when he does have a real one, is kind of genius. And now it requires some follow through, but it's a cool plan because it really does create this possibility that, first of all, people are scared of you if they think you have an idol. He does actually have one to back it up just in case. And then if people think that it's been found, they don't look themselves.
Well,
I mean, that's all very cool.
It's all very cool, but there was a separate layer to that. Is that he didn't initially he did not intend to find it for himself.
Right.
He wanted to put it somewhere obvious and then go find the other one and have two secret ones that nobody knew he had.
Right.
But he just got so impatient,
Yeah.
Sitting there, he was just like so excited for his plan to work that he was just like, you know what, I'm going to find it myself.
Well, and it really doesn't rule out any of the, any of the other part of that plan where he could keep looking and maybe find it. Now, he didn't end up finding it, but like a real one, that is. But the only thing that it's a balance, right? Because if you let someone else find the fake one and think it's real, that's potentially useful. But if the one he really has is secret, it's potentially useful for people to think he has one. But then again, it's also could backfire because it was the thought that he had one or maybe two that was what got anybody to talk about voting for him.
Right. So that's where I think, and where I think this goes and plays into what it did later, is he had this really great idea and he started to execute it really well, and then he just started to overplay all of it. By finding it himself and then doing the thing where he played the fake one to try to get a reaction, and then he didn't really do it correctly, and then he played his other one, and so he just kind of got in over his head after, the paranoia sort of got to him. It
ended up pretty awkward at tribal council, but
right. And whereas if he had maybe just left it, let somebody find it, he could have sat back in the shadows. Nobody would have talked about him. He wouldn't have had to have that awkward thing, and he'd still be holding on to his real idol.
Right.
That's the only reason I think it might have made a difference to the plan.
Yeah. There's a lot of uncertainty still, though, because there's always the possibility that no matter how obvious he tries to make it, that people don't find it. And, that complicates things. And then, of course, if the whole idea is that if no one finds it, they do keep looking, then someone else maybe finds a real one, which is, I don't know. It's interesting. I definitely agree that he it all played out awkwardly at tribal council, but it's complicated. I like that he's making big moves, though.
Oh yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy about that. I like the original plan, and again, this is all armchair Thursday being Survivor, but he could have accomplished the same thing had he pointed out that he saw something, while they were all there, but let someone else do the work and kind of be in possession of the idol, so he's not like the target for having it. And I know that's very difficult and there's nuance to do and it's hard to think through that, but that would have been the best outcome, I think. And
well, certainly in hindsight, I think.
Yeah, that's what I said. I qualified that twice.
No, I'm agreeing with you. And that's what I'm saying, is that I agree in hindsight that would have been better, because I think he didn't fully anticipate how much it made him a target.
Right. Which then made him more paranoid, and then and what ended up happening in that awkward moment, he played the fake idol, tried to get a read, and realized he had no idea what his read was, and was like, well, shit, that didn't work. I guess I could just awkwardly stand here or just be safe.
Yeah. But so in any event, it seems to be working out in his benefit early on here. And the only one who doesn't seem to just believe it is Davy. So good for him that he kind of sniffs out that there's something funny about that. And it helps for him that he knows Nick did have one already. And so he therefore would have the appropriate parchment that he could hide with a fake one. And so he's the only one that would know how Nick would be able to fake it.
Right. And I should say, at this point in the episode, I really kind of stepped back and said, you know what? Like, there's been something building with Davy that I really like. And this was kind of like the tipping point to me, like actively like rooting for him.
Yeah, no, same. Totally. And in fact, certainly, my note right after at the ending was just to say, Davy's my new favorite with Christian gone.
Yep.
He's been, sorry, go ahead.
No, I say, and he does some stuff later where I think, while it was not how I would have gone about like the decision making, but it was his own choice on it. I think he came to the right decision, regardless of how he got there, to not try to extend the idol. I think playing it for himself, as much as I wanted him to play it for Christian, like it was the right thing to do. Like he's really stepped up his game and has put himself in a chance where he's got a case. He's really likable. He's been doing a lot. He's not this huge target, but he's not under the radar either, and that's where you kind of want to be. Like people need to be voting for you. I mean, it's, I'd rather, there's no one who sat at the end and been like, I got no vote. Like they try that. I've got no votes ever. And everybody's like, yeah, because nobody cared. And so you don't win. So, this kind of put him into that echelon of now people are starting to vote for you.
Yeah.
Now you're a threat. It makes it hard for the last 5, but it should be. But it means you got a chance. If you can make it, you can navigate this, you can win.
Yeah. I think he's in a pretty great spot, because although people are paying attention a little bit more now, I mean, there's certainly lots of other people there.
Yep.
Too. So
Mike's starting to, Mike's one of those ones where he's one of those guys who hasn't been getting any votes, but man, he's been a little slippery.
Yeah, he's been just kind of riding the waves as they go, up and down as they go this whole game, which is still just kind of leaving him at the top.
Yeah, but it's also could put him in a unknowingly targeted situation, because, for example, like we watching from the outside, I don't know if you had the same reaction when Allison went to talk to him about Davy's idol, and you're like, oh man, bad idea. Like this is not going to go well because he's going to go stir everything up with this. And of course he did. And not that you can fault him for it. I mean, that's just how he's played though. Like he accumulates this information and then he like releases it in the way that's like most advantageous for him.
Yeah. Yeah. It's information warfare.
Right. And someone could eventually pick that up. And so, I mean, he's a target. You know,
Yeah.
Allison's been a
Well,
target over and over again. You know,
and the other thing is here that it looked very much like it might be someone other than Christian, except for Mike really pushing for Christian. Because he sees him as a big threat, the biggest threat remaining. Got to get rid of him, and I'm going to have to push on it. And because nobody's budging, I'm going to have to release additional information. And the editing at least made it seem as though people were more resistant to that. Maybe they were, but you know, they got there. At least some of them did.
I mean, they all moved away from Nick, which was, you know, after the, you know, reward challenge. That was kind of the that he was kind of the go-to for the bulk of the people.
For a lot of people, yeah. So yeah, so let's not jump around too much. So we had Nick do what he did. Davey doesn't sure he buys it. He keeps looking himself but doesn't find anything yet. But when he doesn't find anything right away, he decides he's concerned about Nick's two idols, thinks he needs to be blindsided, so he tells Christian what his suspicion is, saying, you know, he has at least one. It might be two, but it might also be a fake. We need to blindside him. And you know, in hindsight too, just kind of looking back, knowing what we know at the end, Davey kind of got the best of everything there. You know what I mean? It's like Nick didn't go home, but all of his idols, which were what made him a threat, have been stripped.
Yes. The only thing that I had wished happened here, which maybe it did and it just led to nothing interesting, was that Christian would have been invigorated to say, on the off chance that that's not a real idol, I am going to hunt hard because I got no other choice, you know?
Yeah.
And like I said, maybe he did go hunting and we just didn't see it, but
yeah,
you know, maybe
that's always
found it.
Yeah. Well, that's what we've talked about that in the past as being hard to know, because it certainly makes sense that the producers are not going to include lots of footage of people looking and not finding anything. You know, and so it's hard to know. If we don't see someone looking, that doesn't mean they weren't looking, but it also doesn't mean they were. So we don't know.
Right.
I think Christian had to have been looking at least a little. I mean, he knew he was a big threat.
Yeah. And he was probably looking the way in which we saw him look the first time, where we only saw it because he was successful in that during routine tasks, he scans the horizon.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so, and in this case too, multiple people were actively looking, and so he was not the first, even if he did spend time looking. Yep. But so in any event, that takes us to the reward challenge, which I loved. I really loved that idea of like, how much rope do you get at the beginning? Because the trick, I think, was, as many of them discovered, is that if you're eyeballing how much rope you need, and you assume how much you need to get to where you can throw the sandbags, but don't realize you have to have enough to go retrieve the sandbags that you've thrown, that's more, and several people didn't get enough.
And there's an added twist to it that I didn't even realize until they started throwing them, and Davey kind of got stuck a little bit, is that it's not your initial, at least my initial intuition would have been to eyeball enough rope to get me to where the blocks are.
Mm-hmm.
But you forget that if you miss the blocks, the sandbags are farther.
Yeah.
And that's where Davey got stuck, and why he only could use the two is because his farther ones, he couldn't get to them, because he could only get to like just on the other side of the blocks.
Yeah. So that was tricky. He only had the two that he could kind of keep throwing, and he was having to try to aim his throws carefully so as to not have the bag roll away too far.
Right. It had to at least hit the top of the thing and just skid over to the back, you know, because if he just whiffed, then he couldn't get it.
Yeah. So there was a deceptive amount of strategy in this challenge, which I thought was really cool. Yeah. So we had, I guess I don't have much more to say about it other than Davey wins.
He wins.
Good for him. And certainly there's a momentum building for him even in this episode. Like, I never disliked him. I mean, frequently I really enjoyed him, but you're right that this episode feels like the producers, knowing that Christian was eliminated this time, are starting to build a momentum narrative. I think it felt that way a little bit to me.
Right. Like what it felt like to me was like he went from like comedic sidekick to, leading man.
Yeah.
Over the course of this episode, because like that's why I always liked him before, is he was funny and he he got the game, so he wasn't like just funny.
Right.
He was useful but funny. He was working hard, but just kind of an amusing guy to have around. And now it's like, oh, these things are starting to click over for him, and he's starting to, like you said, momentum is starting to pick up. I'm starting to kind of dig what he's doing.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's one of those things, whenever someone says their strategy is to keep someone else around as a shield or trying to stay below the radar, like that can be a good strategy, but also sometimes what it is really just not doing anything.
Right.
And so it's hard to tell until someone decides to kind of make their move and step into the spotlight. And now that he's starting to do that, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, because he's done it in like, it's a little different than like how Gabby did it, where it was sort of sudden and in the spotlight, which, it might have worked out for her had it not, not backfired on her. But it was a little more delineated of, you were here on the downside and then you're trying to get to here. He sort of like worked his way into what he needed without making it dramatic,
Well, yeah, I mean, she had the bad luck of feeling like having the stars aligned to where she felt like she needed to make her move, but the only real way to move forward relied on someone who has an idol not playing it.
Right.
And specifically, that person is a smart person who is good at detecting whether or not people are trying to betray him. So like that was a tough road. I don't think she did the wrong thing. It's only just didn't work, like we talked about last week.
I don't either. What I'm saying more is, it's maybe more like the analogy of like Davy's more like boiling the frog,
Oh yeah, no, okay, yeah, I agree. She was more impulsive in her decision.
Right. It was much more delineated from where she was in the game to where she was trying to be.
Yeah.
Whereas Davies has been a lot slower, where people haven't really caught on to the fact that he's picking up idols, he's making moves, he's kind of changing the game a little bit. He's won immunity, he's picking the right people to go. It's like, it's just kind of getting there. And yeah, by the end of this, they kind of figured it out. But that's also good for him. Like he needs to be figured out so that he can make a case at the end.
Right.
In
particular, the jury is starting to assemble now, right? There's starting to be people there who need to see him doing things.
Right. And when you have, that might have been, while Gabby's move, had it worked, would have been great, still would have been tough for her to come down to the end and be like, I should win because, I was behind Christian all the time and then I decided to turn on him, if you don't build a resume after that. Whereas Davies built the resume ahead of any big moves, or any big moves that draw attention to him, and so he it's just a better case there, And I'm not saying Gabby, and anyone in Gabby's position, not Gabby herself, anyone who had kind of gone from being second fiddle to the biggest threat that nobody really paid attention to trying to overtake them and then trying to use only that move as their whole reason for winning, it's. Whereas Davey can just sit there and say, tick off, like, here are all of the things I did all the way along the way, and you guys realized it because you started to get after me.
Well, to be sure, Davey just exudes a confidence in his play that Gabby didn't. Like, Gabby was playing well, and the things that she's saying were true, which was she was always helping with the strategic play. But both when she and Christian were being seen as pawns of Carl. And then when she was being seen as, you know, the second in command to Christian, she was right that people were seeing it that way, and therefore understanding that she needed to do something to distinguish herself. But nonetheless, even though all those things were true, she came across in a more scattershot way. Yeah, whereas Davy just feels like he's been on cruise control right up until the point where it's time to change gears, and he's done so very smoothly. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. So
yeah. So in any event, we have Davy getting to pick people to come with them, and Angelina just can't catch a break.
Yeah.
She goes against what she said she wanted to do, which was, I didn't want to use this as a thing, as a currency, but please, please, please remember that rice I got for you. And then he still doesn't pick her. So
I think, unfortunately, this little, as small as this little episode is, and I don't think anybody will ever call it out specifically, I think this solidified Angelina's place in the final.
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up a little bit. It solidified Angelina's place in
the final three as the person who can't win. Because she's been a target. She's flipped from different sides. She's tried different sides. Like, again, nothing worked for her.
Yeah,
there were some kind of things and then she went, and this one thing that she had done that was pretty cool, she tried to leverage it. It didn't work, and then she went and just and kind of whined about it a little bit back at camp, to the point of, it's like, okay, I know you said you weren't gonna use it, but then why do you keep talking about it? Like, just put it away. And she just didn't. And then she had her little thing where she boiled all the rice. Like, none of it's dramatic, and that's why I said it's like a little thing. But I think with her body of what has happened with her and how her personality fits with these people, this set her up and just showed, like, she can't win this game. Like, there's not enough moves left. And
see, I agree with you on one hand, but on the other hand, I feel like if she played it right in the final tribal council, she could really pitch it as, it looked like I was doomed so many times, but I managed to stick around.
I think, though, with the people that you have on that jury, they're going to see that as, yeah, you were doomed and you stuck around because nobody thought you could win, and that's why you're sitting here. Like, I just feel like that's what their personality is going to be. I'm not saying that that's the accurate thing of what happened. Like, so this is different from, this is what I believe Angelina's body of work is. This is what I'm saying is what I think will end up happening based on, like, where we are in the game. I don't think anyone there believes she can win. I don't think anyone would vote for her to win. And we talked about this an episode or two ago. Like, we knew she had to do some things. She's running out of time to do those things. And all that's happening now, instead of doing things, she's trying to leverage something that was, supposed to be like, something that she did to cash in later in the game, and she tried to cash it in for reward. It's like she cashed it in too early, and then she pouted about it and boiled all the rice. It's like, it's just not. It just.
Well, they didn't boil all the rice. They boiled more than they normally would have. But
I thought my note says she made the rest of the rice, but maybe I was wrong. So
no, what she said is they filled up the pot. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So they made as much rice as they could make in one batch. Which I don't know how much that leaves them, but I didn't get the impression it was all of it. But so despite her mini breakdown here, she ended up on the right side of this vote. She was one of the people who voted for Christian.
Yeah, I don't dislike her. I just, and I'm not going to argue anymore. I just want to put it on, like, my bet is that no matter who else ends up in the final three, if it's the final three, that she's there and she doesn't win. That's my statement.
Yeah, I mean, and you might be right, but I feel like without being able to explain it much better, I just have sort of a hunch that we shouldn't write her off yet.
That it's not as definitive as I'm saying. Okay, yeah. Perfect. So how it unfolds next week.
Yeah. See, I feel like she could beat Kara right now.
I I would disagree with that, but some of that might just be, just that I like Kara better. So I don't really want to try to defend that. But so we'll see. We'll just see what happens next week, and
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, so in any case, Davy's explanation for who he picks is a little bit weird. I mean, not the one he says, but in to everyone, but the one he says in confessional is to keep my frenemies close, meaning Nick, and my friends closer, meaning Kara. But it just kind of felt like you're making a reference to like a classic line, but very specifically doing the opposite of what it actually says.
right. He was trying to be clever.
Yeah.
I think he picked the right people, and the intuitive reason of why he did it was accurate. It just was an odd way of trying to describe it and be clever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously the goal was he wanted to be able to blindside Nick, so he had to bring him in order to keep him confident.
But he also likes Nick,
Mm-hmm.
so he didn't want to describe him as an enemy because he likes him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like we were saying earlier, is that everyone kind of likes each other. Nobody's really enemies,
Right.
It's
I think
more
we were vocalizing that, and it botched the analogy a little bit. But
mm-hmm.
the concept of like, I want to get to the reward with Kara and talk to her about my new plan
Mm-hmm.
when we have some time. But I want Nick not to suspect anything, so I'm going to bring him along too and continue to be like really good friends with him, even though he is my enemy within the game.
Right. And honestly, I don't think there's anything about that plan that wouldn't have worked, except it was just, Allison decided that she felt like she was not as on board as they needed her to be.
Right. And she told Mike, who, as we discussed already, is
Mm-hmm.
going to go and do that work.
Yeah. So we had, Davy tells Kara about the plan. She is totally on board. And then Kara is the one that makes the pitch to Allison, but specifically does say, we need to keep Mike and Angelina out of it because we think they would let Nick know. And it's, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I guess that is technically what happened. But, Mike did not initially plan to do that. He only decided to spill that information because he was having trouble persuading the others otherwise. But in any event, Allison is kind of stunned at the shift in the plan because I think she had been assuming, well, it's obviously still Christian to go, right? And so to have that shift, but she's just glad to not be the one on the chopping block.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, if we're talking about two different names and neither of them are me, that's fantastic. But she does feel like, with a few more options, she wants to take a little more control. So she tells Mike, and Mike is feeling conflicted because he does see Nick as a threat, but he's been bonding with Nick. And, he doesn't really want to move away from his original plan to get out Christian. Which, again, when we put ourselves in his shoes, given the choice, get out Nick or get out Christian, I think you get out Christian.
Right, because if you're looking at, the odds of who can win,
Mm-hmm.
and you take out, who is more likely to get voted out because they're seen as a threat. If you're just looking straight up, who can win?
Mm-hmm.
Number one is Christian.
Yeah.
Like, everyone should see that at this point.
Right.
And I know Christian didn't want to be seen that way, but just by the nature of how this game came out and his personality and, because he became, I think he was more likable than he thought he was.
Mm-hmm.
I think he thought he would play the role of like the robot building nerd or whatever. And that people wouldn't really see him as the social threat. And then he would kind of subtly build relationships with everybody. But what he didn't realize is that in a game like this, when you sit and you talk with confidence about like how everything is going down and you're super accurate, like people respect that and like you for it.
Mm-hmm.
And also sit there and, it was like whenever the person drew the thing with the rocks or whatever, and, I forget who that girl was.
Oh, yeah, I know who you mean. And I'm forgetting her name. I want to say it's like an A name.
Yeah. But either way, like when she drew that, all of a sudden everybody was like, oh shit, she like thinks about this like way more than we do. Like, ooh,
Yeah.
that. But he's endearing in like the way that he's so honest with like who he is, and and then and we saw with Gabby, like what he brought with his loved one, like all of a sudden, like it just, the momentum built against him.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were talking about with Davey, how it like slowly is building for him playing a really good game. The momentum for Christian built against the way he was trying to play, which was to not be seen as this threat,
Right.
but like he just rose to the top.
Well, yeah, it was more obvious to everyone how good he was at what he's doing than he realized.
Right.
And, that's a hard thing to assess. And, it's kind of like he was even saying in his final words is, the fact that they all respected me so much that they felt like I was the biggest threat that needed to go, maybe I should think about why they felt that way and consider that in my own self-appraisal.
Yep.
I think Christian's a shoo-in for coming back on some future season if they do another one of those anytime soon. Yeah.
He's everything you want. Like he's good TV. He's a person that you like to root for. He's really good at the game. It's just, yeah, he's the kind of guy you want to watch play this.
Definitely. So in any event, though, we do have Mike at this early stage kind of still pleased that he continues to be in a position where he gets to weigh people's fate in his hands without really being seen as a threat himself. And he says he'll wants to surprise himself about what he might do. In the meantime, this is where Davey goes and finds the clue to the advantage, and then goes out in the rain. And it's the cool advantage, that whole thing of the temporary idol. It's only good for one, but you can wager your vote, which is a cool mechanic. And I liked that little montage of him just standing there in front of the urns and literally like talking through every possible scenario.
Right. And then ultimately, like after talking through everything and he realizes he still doesn't have an answer, like he just turns it to, to God, to fate, to, some sort of spiritual thing of like, hey, give me some guidance. I thought that it was great. And like I said, it wasn't how I weighed how he should do it. Like as an armchair survivor, I said, you definitely keep it. Like, don't risk it. You need it.
This is a critical vote.
Now.
Yeah. Now, even still, his whole plan that he needed to keep his vote for, like that didn't end up happening. So
no, but you can't. You don't, because you don't know who's immune. You don't know what Mike. You don't. He doesn't know that Mike's out there like actively working against his plan.
Yeah.
Because he told Allison, who told Mike. But you had to realize you're trying to change a dynamic. You have people kind of engaged, but you've also just made the statement that you're trying to do something. You probably want your vote and your idol right now.
Yeah.
As opposed to neither.
Yeah. Right. Well, and as opposed to Nick, Davey played his thing while he had to, but he actually canceled out votes for him, whereas Nick played it and nobody voted for him.
Right.
But in any event, yeah, I always, that, show me a sign sort of thing, not to diminish anyone's, religion or spirituality, but I tend to think of those things as usually about it. It's kind of like that old trick about if you can't decide between two things, flip a coin, but then don't look at it, because you find out when it's suddenly up in the air how you really feel about it, like what your gut's really telling you. And I think some
space to get some clarity.
Right. And so when he's looking around for what might be the sign, he could interpret that however many different ways, right?
Right.
And to interpret it as the wind's blowing the flames away from the urns. Well, we watched us in a single shot where they were blown in both directions. I mean, maybe it was more, continuously in the other direction, but in any event.
Your point, I think it like blew toward, like he was saying, like, oh, it's blowing towards both of the first ones, so it's not giving me a sign. Like, I don't know which one to go with. Maybe it's both in the first one, and then it blows away, and he's like, oh, well, now it's blowing away, so it like just wanted me to wait, and now it means there's none not to choose them.
Yeah.
And,
so yeah.
Yeah. The point was he needed some time out after he monologued all that. He needed some white space to just kind of process what he had monologued and figure out what that was.
Yep.
And that's how he chose to do it. And that's a very, very real and good way to get that clarity. So.
Right. Now, whether you believe that there was actually a higher power involved or not is almost kind of incidental in a way. Because it's just as a decision-making process, having to externalize it a little bit, does help.
Yep.
In any event, though, I, like you, agreed with him that from where he was at that point, it was smarter to not give up his vote for this time. In the meantime, we have Nick suddenly considering, would it actually be better to take out Allison instead of Christian, especially with the whole Davids versus Goliath thing? Maybe I'll talk to Kara and Angelina about voting for Allison now. And then, then talks into, Christian and brings in Mike. And he's got this whole idea he's trying to pitch to change it to Allison now. Christian, of course, is on board for that. Mike is still feeling like, why? Isn't Christian still the bigger threat?
Yeah, like how did this become between Nick and Allison when?
Well, for Mike, it was between Christian and Allison. Nick was pitching changing the vote from Christian to Allison.
Mike's saying, why are the two groups of people I'm talking to? One is going for Nick and working through Allison to do that, and one is going for Allison and Nick's working that one. Like, why is Christian not one that they're talking about? Because you're right. Yeah. It should be between Christian and Allison. But they're all talking. They've all moved away from Christian after he was the one that got all the votes last time, but saved himself with his only idol.
Right.
And he's like, why? Wait, how did this shift? Now, these are the two we're talking about? Yeah.
When we talked about it, speculating last time, what I was saying is that it was possible people wouldn't be paying as much attention to Christian because there would be a sense that he's been depowered a little bit now that he had to use his idol.
Of the people, that was accurate.
And except for Mike continuing to push, that is probably what would have happened. But in the meantime, Mike is frustrated. Nobody's willing to budge to change their vote to Christian. So he's still frustrated at that point. But this is where Nick decides, again, kind of impulsively, because I think he does do that sometimes, to tell Davy about the fake. And now that Davy feels like, oh, well, he's leveling with me after all, maybe I don't need to take him out. Maybe he can still be my ally here. And so now he's on board with taking out Allison instead of Nick. And so we've shifted this whole fault line again.
Yes. And this was the part of the episode where, like, this whole sequence that we just discussed, where I got kind of sad because I'm like, okay, so Mike, like, everything was going right for Christian, but Mike just won't let it go. And I hadn't seen the rest of it yet. I'm just like, Mike's not going to let this Christian thing go. And now you've taken away the impact of, why we want to get rid of Nick, because Davy's softened on him. So now Mike has more leverage to take because now it's like, if it's Allison versus Nick and the Nick people aren't, and the guy who's supposed to be driving the Nick thing isn't as sure.
Right. Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden it moves just to like, Allison sounds right, unless there's a better option. And then Mike's like seizes on that and gets a better option. And like, I can kind of see all this starting to happen. And so I'm like rooting for Christian like crazy in this immunity challenge because I know this just isn't adding up for him. Like,
yeah, well, it was always going to be hard for him. We knew that,
we knew that.
Yeah.
But this is where I really saw the writing on the wall in these sequences because, and it was again a lot of because of what we discussed. We talked about Christian falling under the radar, and he was about to do that, and we had Davey, Nick's plan kind of backfiring a little bit and getting Davey to target him, and then Davey softening, and Mike being just relentless on what he wants and doing it in a way that doesn't feel like he's relentless on it. Like he's just sort of, again, he's very slippery.
Well, I was kind of laughing at first when he decided to, he decided to tell Nick about Davey gunning for him, and he realizing kind of only belatedly, yeah, Davey's coming for you, and that's why we should vote for Christian. And Nick, in the meantime, is going, well, what? Davey's coming for me? Well, now we have to vote out Davey. And Mike's kind of like, well, okay, hang on, no. And apparently that worked because even though obviously some people voted for Davey, Nick was not one of them.
Right, and so if going back to real quick too, if they did organize into that split vote,
they must have, because Mike is one of the ones who voted for Davey. Right, that makes no sense unless it was an organized split.
Exactly, and that's why.
You're right. Yeah.
So if you had the two people arguing over who should go between Christian and Davey, and each of them voted the opposite way. Yeah. And that's why I thought it was super erratic. But then now that we talk through it, it's like, well, no, it had to have been.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I think it must have been a plan to split between Christian and Davey, so that it would have been Davey in case of another idol.
What I'm thinking is that Mike, to appease Nick, said, okay, well, because of this idol, or or if there's an idol, let's do Christian first because he's the bigger threat. We all agree. Yeah. But we'll put votes on Davey. So if an idol gets played for Christian, you get what you want.
Yeah. You know what? Now that we've talked through it, there's no other explanation, because who are the two people who weren't in on that split vote that thought it was Allison? It's Davey and Christian.
Davey and Christian, yep.
Everyone else, except for Davey and Christian, were on board with the split vote of splitting between Davey and Christian. And they were the two on the outs voting for Allison.
Right. So the quick summation of going back to that is that Mike really made all that happen. It makes Mike super dangerous.
Oh yeah. No, in fact, now see, I came into, to this discussion as feeling like it seemed just very chaotic and nobody knew what they were doing, and this is just how it turned out. But now that we've figured out that there was an actual plan, and specifically it was Mike's plan, I'm really impressed with Mike.
Yeah.
He's he's in a good spot now. Right. So in any event, that takes us pretty much, well, we didn't really talk much about the immunity challenge, but
the only thing I have to say for that is that me and my wife were both laughing at how good Probst is at his job, that he could deliver the commentary on that challenge with a straight face.
Yeah. Well, it was so obvious that he's doing it on purpose too.
Yes, and he's so good at it, and he's like, so-and-so's balls have dropped.
Yep. And it's like, it gives, when they start to separate, it gives you an uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah, it's sometimes when they're stuck together, it's a problem. Sometimes when they're separating, it's a problem.
Yeah, I made a note about that too. It was not.
Yeah. And Probst is just dead on.
Oh yeah, no, I love that he's just deadpanning this stuff, but it's so obvious that he must know. So he's clearly doing it on purpose and yet playing it totally straight.
Yes. that was
great.
that was my my only note on the challenge.
No, that was definitely fun. So I think going into tribal council then, I felt at the time watching that it really did seem very much up in the air still. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. The only thing that seemed for sure is that Davey was not going to play his one-time idol for anyone other than him. That would be stupid.
Right.
You know, at this stage of the game, you don't be playing idols to save other people.
Nope. Yeah, there, especially when your strategy to save them is because you want to hide behind them. Like,
right.
okay,
Yeah.
like you, there's only 5 people left after tonight. There's nobody to hide behind, especially if you want to win. Like, you don't want to be hiding behind people.
Yeah, it's time to step out of the shadow for sure.
Right.
So in the meantime, there's discussion of, you know, the voting blocks terminology resurfaces, which I can't help but be irritated by, because even though it's obviously true that that's what's happening, I never liked that description of it.
Right. And it was so funny, so ironic that literally we just talked about that like a night or two ago. And, you know, even with me saying, like, I was giving them praise for bringing the concept back, or Survivor moving towards that concept without acknowledging it and like drumming on it. And then they come and they do it. And I knew my reaction to it, and I definitely knew your reaction to it, because you didn't. It took me a while to convince you what I was even talking about, because you had such a visceral reaction to me just saying voting blocks.
I'm not sure, honestly, why I have that reaction to it. I don't know. Just something in me resists that being a good way to describe the effect it's being used to describe.
Right.
But I don't know.
Exactly. And that's why I said, like, last time we talked, like, I walked like you through what I meant, and you were like, okay, yeah, like I see what you're saying. Like, it's more fluid. And I was like, yeah, like, it's more fluid, you know, not, but you were just, you hated the voting blocks so much that you didn't even want to listen to me. And then they come on and they're just like hammering on it. I'm like, oh,
well, it was, I saw it coming before they actually said it. And it was just like, no. All right.
No, me too. And all I could think about was being so angry about it.
I'm not angry, but
you know what I meant. Like,
irritated.
Yeah.
About that. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so I like that they talked about too that, you know, nobody really dislikes anybody. I like the whole idea just of reiterating that whole thing of you can't trust anybody, but you have to trust somebody. I like that. And I also liked Christian, you know, responding to a question of that nature from Probst and saying, well, I think you have just very effectively summed up the game of Survivor, Jeff.
Yes. That was funny.
I thought it was fascinating that when the votes, they went to the votes, we didn't see anybody's vote. Usually when it's down to, you know, to 1 or 2 big names, we usually see one person vote for one person and another person vote for the other. But we didn't see anybody's this time. But in any event, so Davey plays his temporary idol. I liked that he did not say that it could have only been used this time. That he didn't say anything about like, oh, well, I had to. You know, I think, and in fact, I think that it may have even been calculated specifically to make Nick play his own idol, even though he wasn't in danger.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Especially since it really did seem like Nick was looking a lot to Davey in his own sort of antics. Because, you know, spooked by this, Nick plays his idol too, but sort of like, I found this by the raft, specifically calling out this one. And I was thinking like, okay, so he's just trying to make everybody more confident that that one was the real one. And but then there's the whole thing of like, you have to tell Probst who you're playing it on. And he's like, oh, yeah, well, that one's actually fake. And I was doing a thing and I'm standing awkwardly now. And I guess I'm playing the other one now too. And then he goes and sits down. No, you still have to tell him who you're playing it for. Oh yeah, that's me. So it's just a whole awkward thing.
Right. And it's again, like, we can keep looking back on it, and it was a tough plan from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Even this he could have handled better. Like, even with his
Yeah.
initial, like, going in. Because you have the time. He could have played the idol, said it was for him, went back and sat down while everybody else is, like, kind of in their shock.
Yeah.
And Probst is reading through his, the monotony of, like, this is not an immunity idol. And,
right.
And he'd have all that time to watch what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
and then make his call if that's what he really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And say, well, you're right, but this is. And then walk up there with confidence, drop it in, and say, I'm playing it for myself and Christian.
Yes,
and
yes.
This is an immunity idol. And
I think, that was the smooth version that I'm sure he had in his head. And unfortunately, he just kind of fumbled the ball a little bit there during the execution of it. And it's unfortunate for him, too, that he did end up playing it when he really didn't need to. But then again, that might have been part of the idea. Like there might have been, some people invested in trying to make him play it, even if he wasn't getting voted for.
Right. And it again builds a narrative for Davey that he can go into it and say, like, if he's up against Nick and say, I got you to play 2 idols when one of them wasn't even real. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So
in any event, Davey's votes, 2 votes for Davey that didn't count. And then it was the remaining votes were 2 for Alice and 3 for Christian. We kind of talked through how that broke down already. Nick grumbling that he wasted his idol, looking bummed about that. Probably, rightfully so. That's a bummer. But I thought it was interesting that on their way out, Alec and Allison exchanged that little, hang loose gesture.
Yep.
And I guess just reiterating that now that Christian is gone, I think Davey is my favorite. Although now that we've talked through it, Mike is the dark horse for sure.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing that while we were talking that I hadn't paid attention to is I kept referencing, like, there's only going to be 5 people left after this. But there's not. There's 6 of them.
Yeah.
So we're going in, and maybe that's what we always go into the final.
No, we've had finales with 6. There's been both 5 and 6 people in finales before.
But we're going to move quick.
Mm-hmm.
If in, the first hour we've got to get rid of, 3 people.
Yeah.
So, or whatever, hour 20, whatever they do it. But there's no idols left. I'm curious whether they're going to put any back in play. I don't know if there's a hard, fast rule over when they stop putting them back in play. I know there's a rule as to when you can stop using them.
Mm-hmm.
But do they put them back in play all the way until you use them? And does that impact anything? Or have they moved towards, like, this advantage thing?
I think we don't know, and I think that's by design.
No, it is, but it makes it from a handicapping standpoint of the who can win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of why I think I made that, like, that statement of, like, why I was so sure Angelina can't, is more out of, like, realization that I have no way to, like, there's no way to pick who can.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, and you even pointed out ways Angelina could win. Like, of the 6 of them, like, there's a path to victory for everybody.
Yeah.
I personally don't think Angelina has one, but you don't think Kara has one. Right. So there are probably 4 stronger ones between Allison, Nick, Mike, and Davey. Mm-hmm. Those are probably the 4 favorite, but that's 4 people.
Yeah.
That are favorites, and we got to get to 1. Like, this is a great season.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though I'm not totally writing off Angelina, it's not that I think she's got great odds. I just don't. I don't know that she's trailing as distant from the pack.
Right, you gave her a path to victory, basically. You know, and it's not an easy one, but it exists. But it's what's making this season so much fun is that like
this is a good season,
right? And even just going back to Angelina, like I wasn't super fond of her like at the beginning, you know, and then when we sort of talked through, like, you know what, it wasn't that she wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't aligning right.
Yeah, she just kept zigging when it turned out that everybody else was zagging.
Right, and then and when I started to watch it from that perspective, it's like, okay, yeah, I don't mind her. You know, yeah, I kind of like her, and that's why I think I felt like this episode, you know, and maybe again it's a personal thing, and I'm projecting my lens onto them. I did not like how she tried to leverage the rice thing and then just wouldn't let it go, and then got angry and boiled the rest of the rice. And I think, you know, it probably was exacerbated by the fact that I thought she boiled all the rice, which you pointed out wasn't true. So I backed off a little on that. But that's the only reason, you know, and Kara's been much more likable, all that type of stuff. The other four are just so strong in the game. You know, Allison, I want to see, now that the game's kind of been unlocked, I want to see what she can actually do. You know, she's been like shown as such a threat, but we've never really seen, outside of like just being smart, you know, composed, physically, you know, doing well. Like we've never seen her like strategically like orchestrate like all this stuff. So I kind of want to see her, because she's always been on the like trying to get herself out of being voted out.
She's been in scramble mode. Yeah.
Right. I want to see her like kind of like, can she kind of reshape this? Because she's definitely, if she can win. But she has to like seize that, you know?
Yeah.
Davey, we've talked about. Mike, we've talked about. Nick, we've talked about, not this time more, but last time, you know, so.
I still, I'm getting an echo of myself from your computer at the moment, but now it stopped. Okay. Anyway, I feel like right now, I think Davey and Mike are sort of front runners, and then maybe Allison and Nick at tier 2, and then Kara and Angelina tier 3.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Yep. So we'll see that, because that doesn't necessarily mean well, in fact, it certainly does not mean that Kara and Angelina are the next two to go.
No, it could be the other one.
Yeah, once we're at the finale, that's not how it works anymore.
Right. Davey and Mike could be the next to go, because they're tier 1.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So in any event, we will.
And you don't really have a dominant like challenge person.
Right.
You have people who are all pretty good at all of the types of challenges that are going to come up in the next few sequences. You know, like nobody's dominant, but nobody's deficient. You know, so that's a wild card too. And it's going to be so much fun next week.
Yeah. All right. So in the meantime, just we'll finish off with a reminder to anyone who's listening to this that I am going to be on December 15th and 16th playing Dungeons and Dragons for 24 hours in order to benefit children's hospitals as part of the charity Extra Life. There will be a link in the notes below the video and in the podcast notes for where you can check that out. And then you can check out my Twitch channel on the weekend to see us play, and it's going to be a blast.
I agree. Donate.
All right.
Donate.
Yes. And help spread the word. That's good too.
Yep.
So with that, good night, everybody. We'll see you next week for the finale of Survivor, David versus Goliath.
Yes.